Welcome, everyone. This is Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. We are live for episode 10 here today. We're covering a little bit deeper into the Longhorn football team for 2023. We're each going to be giving our top 5 players going into the season. Going to be going a little bit deeper on each player. And make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this, for one. And two, leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below. Those things are going to help recommend the video to new viewers. But before we get into the content, joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Michael Ween. How you doing?
Doing good. Welcome back, guys, to Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, or in other words, what we are calling now DITHOL. And I know that sounds kind of funny. It is, but it's just an easier way to say it's an abbreviation for Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. So just a fair warning, if you see DITHOL spelled out on the video, when you click on the video, that is why it's just an abbreviation for Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Hope you guys enjoy all these videos. This weekend will be a big recruiting summary / breakdown for the 2024 class that I will be doing. That will probably be Saturday night or Sunday morning. I haven't decided yet, but keep an eye out for that. Texas has now up to 15 commits for the 2024 class. They're about halfway done. I expect them to take anywhere from 25 to 30 commits, probably closer to 30 than to 25 for this class. Just picked up a huge 4-star defensive line commit earlier this afternoon and expect to get a high 4-star cornerback on Saturday. So it'll be sometime after that announcement, either Saturday night or Sunday morning. Keep an eye out for that if you're into the recruiting stuff. But today, we have a very exciting episode. I'm calling this episode 2 of our Texas football season preview series, which is going to continue into August up until the season starts. And today we're going to be ranking, as Emmy said, our top 5 football players on this 2023 Texas football roster that has a ton of talent on it. On paper is favored to win the Big 12, and rightfully so. They were picked preseason to win the Big 12, got some great transfers, and they added, of course, all the talent that's coming in from that 2023 recruiting class. And they have a lot of returning starters on both sides of the ball, although they did lose the obvious. I mean, DeMarvion Overshown was a finalist for the Dick Butkus Award, which is the best linebacker in college football. He departed. On the offensive side of the ball, obviously the 2 running backs, Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, both went in the top 3 rounds of the draft. So on and so forth. But today we're here to discuss the 2023 roster, and we're going to talk about these players a little more in depth. I have an honorable mention because it was hard to just do top 5. I have an honorable mention I want to talk about. Do you have an honorable mention that you want to talk about before we actually get into our top 5?
No, I do not, but I can add one because I do have someone in my head, but
Okay.
I didn't plan for it.
Well, let's hear it. Let's hear your thoughts.
Well, I just think from the defensive tackle position, what was his name? I'm sorry. I'll let you go first. I need to get his name in front of me.
Sorry to put you on the spot there. For me, there were 2 guys in particular that I really want to mention that didn't quite make the cut for my top 5 list. And I think these would be guys that if you were to ask me, at the end of last season before Texas brought in this recruiting class and got these transfers, that could have possibly been on the list, but just didn't quite make it. But because of their production in 2022, deserve to be mentioned in this conversation. The one in particular that I really wanted to mention that fans, casual fans, fans that aren't like extremely plugged into the program, like myself or other Texas alums or people who just are diehard Texas football fans, may not know as much about Jahdae Barron, uh, junior defensive back. He will be a junior this year, will be eligible for the draft if he has a big season. Um, he really came into his own last year. Speed, quickness, and anticipation from the nickelback position, has the versatility to play some corner, to drop down and play some linebacker. When you really look at his skill set from the nickelback position, he led Texas in defensive tackles for loss with 11 and a half from the nickelback position. That's impressive. And that really speaks to a sort of an averagely sized secondary player. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but his speed, his quickness, and anticipation to just blow up aspects of the outside run schemes of these opposing teams was super impressive. I expect him to have another big season, and he could potentially be one of those guys that shoots up draft boards as the season progresses. I think he could have an all Big 12 kind of season. I think he's really good. He's one of the better players in the Texas secondary, a secondary that's going to be deep and is going to get even deeper with the guys that are coming in this 2023 recruiting class, the guys who will be freshmen, and potentially the big secondary class that Texas has coming for it in 2024. In the 2024 recruiting class, Jahdae Barron is a guy to watch in that secondary. There are a lot of good players in the Texas secondary. I think this Texas secondary has the potential to be one of the better secondaries, if not the best secondary we've seen at Texas since those national championship teams. They've got experience, they've got talent, they've got super blue chip talent with a guy like Jalen Catalon, the transfer from Arkansas, coming over in the winter through the transfer portal. But Jahdae Barron, man, his versatility to play corner, a little linebacker, like a dime linebacker type of situation, his ability to defend the run as sort of an undersized type secondary player, and to have 2 interceptions, produce a forced fumble, score a touchdown, return a touchdown, or return a fumble for a touchdown, and lead this team in tackles for loss is just so impressive from that position. So, Jahdae Barron is a guy that I really wanted to talk about and acknowledge, although he didn't quite make the cut for my list.
Yeah, I feel really stupid because I double checked the name, and actually the guy I was thinking of had actually entered the draft. So we'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Um, so you had
Jahdae
Barron as your
Barron.
honorable John Day Barron. Okay,
Jahdae Barron.
perfect.
It's a little bit of a weird spelling. It's Jahdae. Jahdae Barron. He's a primary. His primary position is nickelback, but he's got the versatility to play, corner, play some dime linebacker in their sub packages. Really productive in the run game from a secondary standpoint. There were a lot of times last year where you saw him blowing up screens, outside runs, good anticipation, had 2 interceptions last year. He was second on the team in interceptions. He was just an all-around productive player, and I expect him to have an all Big 12 caliber season this upcoming year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that archetype is something you see a lot in the NFL. That smaller linebacker that has a little bit more speed, a little bit more versatility, especially from a coverage standpoint. And I think with how much the NFL and how much in the Big 12 you have to play nickel and dime packages with an extra defensive back, I think a guy like that definitely gives Texas a little bit more versatility and able to keep a linebacker on the field through that as well.
Exactly. So let's get into our top 5 lists. Since you do not have an honorable mention in mind, that is okay. Put you on the spot a little bit. We'll go to you for your number 5 first, since I just did my honorable mention, and then we'll come back to me, and I'll give you some thoughts on who your number 5 is. So go ahead and reveal to us who is the 5th best player on this team going into 2023, in your opinion.
My 5th best player for 2023 was Jalen Ford. Also a linebacker, 236 pounds, recorded 119 tackles last season, and was the workhorse linebacker in a way, just in terms of run game. He's able to clean up the mess, basically. In the style of defense Texas likes to play, you have to have a linebacker that understands what offenses want to do from a run game standpoint. And Jalen Ford was able to plug up all those gaps and make a ton of plays. And I expect that to continue for 2023. I think in terms of athleticism, in terms of intangibles, it doesn't get much better than him in terms of linebackers throughout the entire country. I think there's a short list of guys you could name that are above him at the moment, but he has a chance of even jumping them, in my opinion.
Yeah, well deserved to be on the list. Good pick. I have him a little higher on my list, but I can totally understand where you're coming from. It varies depending on who you have ahead of him. And your reasoning, I think, was fantastic. I'll wait to talk about him and give my thoughts on Jalen Ford when I get to him on my list. But what I will say is he was third team All-American in 2022 for a reason. I mean, the sheer production that you talked about, tackles, forcing turnovers, being good in pass coverage, which I think is a really underrated aspect of his game, being able to cover, read quarterbacks' eyes, and then also make the necessary plays in the running game, just being an all-around productive leader of this defense. And I believe it was his sophomore season, as he really came on at the end of his freshman year at a premium position on this Texas defense. When you really look and dig deeper into the roster, which I'll do later on in August when we get a little closer to the season. But when you look at the linebacker position, aside from Jalen Ford, Texas has a lot of talent, but it's a lot of unproven talent. There are a lot of question marks now that DeMarvion Overshone has departed. Diamante Tucker Dorsey, who played a lot of middle linebacker next to Jalen Ford last year, he departed as well. There's a lot of guys who are talented but haven't quite proven themselves at the college football level. Texas had one of the big, most exciting parts of this 2023 recruiting class that just came on campus is it was a really good linebacker class that Texas signed. And it was headlined by 5-star out of Denton, Anthony Hill, who I think eventually and could by the end of this season step into that role beside Jalen Ford at the middle linebacker position. But right now, if we were to do a top 5 most important player list on this Texas football team, which I think would be a little different than the top 5 best players, he would be right up there, like in the top 3, because if Texas loses him, there's a big drop off between the production that he's given at the college football level and everybody else that Texas has at that position right now. So he's really important, and he's going to be a huge part of their success moving forward. Good pick with Jalen Ford. I'll go ahead and give you my number 5 player. And I went back and forth, but for my number 5, I went with A.D. Mitchell. Now, we can talk about the sheer production at Georgia. We can talk about the concerns with injury, which are fair. One of the reasons I think that people overlook A.D. Mitchell is because he He struggled to stay on the field. Availability has been a problem for some different reasons. But when he's been on the field, in the sample size, the medium sample size that we have, when A.D. Mitchell has been on the football field, he has been an ultra productive receiver, arguably the most productive receiver in college football playoff history, with 4 touchdown catches in college football playoff games. He's caught a touchdown in all 4 college football playoff games he's been in or participated in. And when it comes down to it, man, he started for the best team in college football last year. And I just have to ask myself, like, and this in some ways could be considered flawed logic, but realistically, how many players on this Texas football team from last year's Texas football team, could have started and starred for that Georgia team last season? I'm going to tell you, there are probably a couple, but there aren't many. And I don't think, just in terms of pure football player and what he brings to this football team at the receiver position, being able to take so much attention away from Xavier Worthy, who we'll probably talk about later on, just to give you a hint. Yes, he's valuable, super talented. They're raving about his catch radius and body control out in space. You saw the catch in the end zone that he made in the spring game. Just incredible. He's really talented. He's coming from a place where he started and was really productive when he was on the field. And I just think he's in for a big season. I don't think he's going to be the best receiver on the Texas football roster when it's all said and done at the end of the season. But there will be games, I think, where he's the best player on the field, period. And so I think it's tough. And if you don't have him on your list, that's okay, because we've yet to see him in the Texas system. And if we're more projecting, well, that's a different story. But he's right up there. Like, he would have been my honorable mention if I didn't have him on the list. I think he's just that good.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely considered him, like, heavily considered him for either my number 5 or 4 spot. He's legitimately that good. The talent is through the roof, and there's a lot of weapons on this Texas football team to begin with, and the only reason I decided to leave him off the list just for now is it's really only because there's only one ball. It's not anything to do with whether or not he can be productive, because I think he's shown enough for us to believe he can and he will be. So
Yes.
it's more a matter of just putting it together on the field and showing us.
I think late in games this season, because when you think about last year, and I know some of you didn't watch all the games, but when you really think about last year, with the side of a cup, take out the Oklahoma game where things just really clicked, and a couple other games, Quinn Ewers didn't have, I don't think, a go-to guy when he had to make a throw. There was some disconnect between him and Xavier Worthy, some frustration on Quinn's side with the drop balls by Xavier Worthy. That was an issue for Xavier last year, but we did find out, a couple weeks after the bowl game, that Xavier was playing in that bowl game against Washington with a broken hand. So it's understandable, but Xavier got a lot of pushback for his, I guess, attitude and drop ball problem last season. Some of that is rightfully so, and some I think was unfair to Xavier, but we'll talk about that later. But I think I sort of forgot where I was going with that point. But anyway, you kind of get where I'm going with that. I think A.D. Mitchell, when it comes down to it, is going to take a lot of that pressure off Xavier Worthy, and it's going to help Xavier Worthy and catapult Xavier Worthy to a different level. And when you think about all the other receivers Texas has brought in or has on its current roster, the Jordan Whittingtons of the world, who I think would start for a lot of the other Big 12 football teams right now, and the Jonte Cooks of the world, the super blue chip 5-star from DeSoto, who comes in as a freshman. He's going to be vying for playing time. This Texas football receiving roster, and I could go even deeper than that to the DeAndre Moores and the, Casey Canes of the world. It's a really productive Texas football receiving room. This is probably one of the better Texas receiving rooms, I think, deeper Texas receiving rooms we have seen in the past 5 to 10 years. And Texas has had some pretty damn decent receiving rooms going back to the Devin Duvernay, Colin Johnson, Little Jordan Humphrey days. But this, I think, takes it to another level. I mean, Xavier Worthy coming out of high school was a super blue chip recruit. Jonte Cook, super blue chip recruit. Jordan Whittington, super blue chip recruit. A.D. Mitchell, super blue chip recruit. Like, they have guys in that receiving room, guys that I think all 4 of those guys expect to some extent play in the National Football League if things go well. So we'll talk a lot about the Texas receiving room later on, but A.D. Mitchell, look for him to do big things. Did you give your number 5? I forget.
Yeah, I did. I gave my number
Okay.
5. My number 5 was Jalen Ford.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, give us your number 4.
My number 4 is Quinn Ewers. I think projecting towards next year, I think Quinn will be a first-round pick in 2024. I'm going to go on the record right now. I really do believe that. And going into this season, I think the foundation in his game, it's all there. He's solid in reading progressions. He's already has intangible skills and athleticism and arm talent. It's just all about just getting it put together and getting it done for all 4 quarters every single game. And that's tough for any quarterback, but Quinn Ewers, I think, is a dark horse for Heisman discussions. And that's if the stars align. I don't want to put the expectations too high. I don't want to act like Heisman stuff is the expectation, but I do think if we see him improve the way I see him capable, it's on the cards.
Yeah, it's totally in the cards. He's one of the arguably he's one of the most talented players. Like, if we were doing a top 5 most talented player list or top 5 most important player list, I would have definitely had him near the top of my list. I didn't quite have him on my list right now, but 3 weeks into the season, like, he could be number 1 if he goes into Tuscaloosa and has a big game there, like he sort of started to have in Austin last year in that Texas Bama game before he got hurt. He could catapult up my list. And it's nothing for me against Quinn Ewers. Like, this Texas football team is going to go as far as Quinn takes them. And so there is a level of expectation and pressure there that we've talked about before many times already in the short life of the DITHOL podcast, which you can go check out our prior episodes. But yeah, I absolutely get where you're coming from. He absolutely got consideration. If I had to rank him right now, I'd probably, just in terms of sheer production from last season and my expectation going into this year, because I don't want to project too high and then be disappointed, although I do think he's going to make significant improvement and be maybe the best quarterback in the Big 12 this upcoming season. I'd probably rank him number 7, right behind A.D. Mitchell and Jahdae Barron, who was my honorable mention, just based on the production from last season and what I'm projecting going into this year. But, I mean, having him number 4, I have no problem with that at all. He's absolutely the most important player on this Texas football team. And I know that's to some of you easy to say because he's the quarterback. But really, I mean, a lot of the flaws in this Texas football team, and I got to say, like, this roster doesn't have many holes anymore. The way that this staff has recruited and used the transfer portal, Texas really doesn't have too many holes on this roster. That's why the expectations are so high to go try and make the Big 12 championship game, possibly win the Big 12 and beyond. The 9 to 10 win expectation, maybe even beyond that. That's why it's high. It's because there's not a whole lot of holes on this football team. So Quinn Ewers really was the missing piece last year. I think if Quinn doesn't miss much time and maybe plays a little better and more consistent, Texas probably wins 10 games last year and is in the Big 12 championship game at the very least. I can't say they would have won the Big 12 championship game because we just will never know. And K-State and TCU were some damn good football teams last season. But there's a good chance that if Quinn gets more reps last year, doesn't get hurt, and plays the entire season and figures some things out early on, like he was doing throughout the early weeks of the season and into the Oklahoma game, there's a good chance Texas wins another game or two and is playing in the Big 12 championship last year. So I definitely project him to have a big year, possibly make the all Big 12 team. I mean, Jalen Daniels at Kansas is another dangerous threat at the quarterback position. There are some other quarterbacks in the Big 12 that could vie for that honor as well, but Quinn's the most talented of all of them, no question about it. And if him being a first-round draft pick next year is the best thing that can happen to this Texas football program. Period.
Definitely. Just from a recruiting standpoint, that's a huge selling point for future recruits.
And it's huge for Sarkisian. Like, aside from Ellinger, who was he was really good when he was at Texas. But, I mean, we've gone through so many, the Hudson Cards of the world, the Casey Thompsons, to the years of Charlie Strong with, the whoever it was at quarterback.
Rod Hurd, Tyrone Swoops. Oh, jeez.
When was the last time you saw a Texas football quarterback drafted, not just in the first round, but in the second round? Like, it's been a long time. Like, you got to go back to the Vince Young days.
Colt McCoy, really, I think.
The Mac Brown days, to where you can find a Texas football quarterback that was drafted that high or was thought of that way. And the good thing for Quinn is the talent is all there. It's just got to all come together. And he went through the freshman growing pains, and that's why there are high expectations for him this year. And based off everything that we've heard in spring ball and throughout the offseason, there's no reason to not believe that he's not going to have a big season. So I'll leave it at that. I could talk about Quinn Ewers all day, but we got stuff to get to. For my number 4, I went with JT Sanders, or Jatavion Sanders. Call him JT for short. The tight end, the junior tight end, who I'll make this pretty short and sweet. Last year, 54 catches, 613 yards, about 11.5 yards per reception. Really good for a tight end. 5 touchdowns. Was really productive. I think he's got the best hands. Like, he's the best pure catcher of the football on this team. And that's saying something, given that you have A.D. Mitchell, you have Xavier Worthy, and some other talented receivers. He's not the most athletic guy in the world, but he's a willing pass blocker. He could get better in that area, but he's a willing pass blocker. He does a little bit of everything. You can hit him down the seam. He can make contested catches. He'll be a big target in the red zone this year. He's going to be a mismatched nightmare, 6'4". I don't know his exact weight, but, they have him listed 6'4", 240. Got his experience last year pretty durable. As I mentioned, a willing pass blocker. I think he's the most talented tight end Texas has had since the Jermichael Finley days, which was a while back. And I think by the end of this year, when we do our draft coverage for next year's draft, the 2024 draft, and we talk about the tight end position, JT Sanders will be talked about right behind Brock Bowers at Georgia. He's that good. So I went with JT Sanders. I expect him to have a big season. I don't know how many catches and yards and touchdowns he'll have, but he will have an impact on winning this year for Texas. He's just like they can split him out wide. He's one of those tight ends that can do a little bit of everything based on his body type and what he can do from a route running standpoint and that sort of thing. So JT Sanders, look for him to have another all Big 12 season. He was first team all Big 12 in 2022 last year. He was one of two Texas football players from last year to be first team all Big 12. Now, I totally expect them to have a lot more than two this year, but in addition to Xavier Worthy, he was the only other guy who was first team all Big 12 last year. So expect a big season from JT Sanders.
Yeah, I had JT Sanders at number 3. You look at this dude's frame, 6'4", 240, and you just think, dang, this dude should be playing D-line. And you know what? He did play D-line in high school. He was playing both sides of the ball. I mean, he's just an overall stud. And really, when you think about his size and his weight, he's super quick and agile for that size as well. Like he's very fluid and has good agility. I think from a red zone standpoint, there's not many guys in the country you would put above him or can get above him when it comes to high pointing the football. And yeah, I expect a big year. I think in terms of impact, his highlights will probably mostly be in the red zone, but I could see him being a big time third down target as well. He's a safety blanket for Quinn Ewers.
Absolutely. He was one of those guys that coming out of high school, I'll put it this way. For those of you who don't follow recruiting very deeply, there are certain players throughout the country, throughout the state of Texas, that are recruited as athletes just because they either played multiple positions in high school and they don't quite, there's not a classification yet for what position they'll play in college. They're just really good athletes. And JT Sanders was one of those multiple position guys in high school. As you mentioned, he played some defensive line, but slimmed down a little bit and now is playing tight end for Texas. And I think that was a really good decision by the Texas football coaching staff. He is just an all-around great athlete. He's one of the better athletes on this team. And there are a lot of really good athletes on this Texas football roster. When you really start digging into like the freshmen, man, that's quite the honor to be in that conversation. So good pick. JT Sanders, number 3 for you. For my number 3, he was your number 5. I went Jaylan Ford. And I'll kind of dig a little deeper here. Jaylan Ford, he was a wonderful surprise and started to really produce at the end of his freshman season, which was the first season under Sark. But last year, man, really just burst onto the scene. And when you really look at the sheer production, he was a third-team All-American last year. And I don't think there are any other, aside from one particular offensive lineman who we might talk about a little later, there weren't any other like All-American caliber players on this Texas football team last year. Jaylan Ford was third-team All-American, meaning he was one of the best 5-ish linebackers in the country last season. as you spoke to a little earlier. Sheer production, 119 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 4 interceptions. He led the team in interceptions, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries. And get this, the Texas defense forced 14 turnovers last year, which needs to get better in 2023, and I think it will. Jaylan Ford was responsible for half of those. He forced seven of their 14 turnovers last year. He was a huge part of this defense. He made a leap from 2021 to 2022, and I think he's going to make another leap this year, just in terms of his maturity, his football IQ, being the leader on this Texas defense. And that experience is so valuable, especially at a position like middle linebacker where you are in charge of everything that goes on the defensive side of the football. And with more talent around him now than in past years, that's only going to help as well. So I think Jaylan Ford, he's in for another big season. We might not see the 4 interceptions because let's be honest, in college football, that's sort of rare for a middle linebacker. But just because, I'll warn you guys, just because he isn't putting up the sheer turnover numbers that he put up last year, I think some of that was, some of that can be attributed to knowing what to do and knowing where to be on the field. But some of it was like, oh, the ball just popped into my hands and I got it and I was in the right place at the right time. It's a combination of both. So if he doesn't quite have the 4 interceptions or, the 3 forced fumbles, I think his sack numbers could go up, 2 sacks, and he's just going to be the engine for this Texas defense moving forward. I think he could potentially be second team or even first team All-American with a really big season. I think he's that good. And the last thing I'll say is, if we're talking about players that, knock on wood, because I don't want to put this into the universe and have anybody get hurt. Never wish that on anybody. But he is one of the guys on this Texas football team who they can absolutely not afford to lose this upcoming year just because of the circumstances and what's behind them and who would step in to replace their production. So Jaylan Ford absolutely deserves to be on this list, and he's number 3 for me. So let's hear number 2.
Okay, yeah, my number 2 was Xavier Worthy. I think he's taller than you think. He's bigger than you think. He's only 165 pounds, and he runs a 4.2 40. But I think in terms of just him as a target, not just as a deep threat, I think that's what's going to take the biggest step going into this year. He's going to be the outright number 1 guy from the jump, Quinn Ewer's favorite target. And I think his speed will not only play a factor, but I think he's starting to learn how to use his speed to get open on all parts of the field. That speed can be leveraged in a lot of different ways. And I think he's going to be used more on crossing routes, just getting the ball in his hands, just short passing game, screens. I think Sarkisian is going to be extremely creative with getting the ball in his hands. And you're going to see that catches number go way up this year. One of the questions many had about him this past season was some of the drop issues, but keep in mind, he was mostly used as a deep threat last year. When you're not in the rhythm of the game and you're only being used on low percentage 40-yard bombs down the field, that can be an extremely tough role to play. And obviously, you'd like him to catch the ball, sure, but I think being the X wide receiver rather than the field spacer down the field will be a much more suitable role for him.
Yeah, and it was sort of by circumstance because he's also my number 2. So we can just go back and forth on the Xavier Worthy side of things. It was sort of by circumstance that he was forced into that role that I don't think best suits his skill set. Like, yes, he's fast, and yes, he's great at getting open. Like, that's one of his best traits is he's always open. Like, if he's being, in single coverage, in double, when he's being double teamed, which he was a lot last year, he was still open. And there were some of the frustration that Xavier Worthy had was from just, I think, some of the inaccuracies and miscommunications with a freshman quarterback, which happens, I mean, all across the country with true freshman quarterbacks. But when Xavier Worthy hit campus in 2021 as a true freshman, he wasn't like, that's not like, he can do that. And I think he'll get better at that as Quinn is more accurate and more accustomed to the game and more acclimated, and has put in more work on that part of his game in the offseason. But also, Xavier Worthy, I think, in terms of just catching the ball and tracking the ball downfield, will get better at that as time goes on this season. But, by circumstance with Isaiah Nayer, the transfer from Wyoming, who they got before last year, who tore his ACL in the preseason last year and was out for the season, he was really a guy that was brought in to do the job that Xavier Worthy did last year, which was be the deep threat, be the field spacer, be the take the top off the defense type guy, which he did a lot of at Wyoming. And man, if he joins this Texas receiver room, I mean, I don't know that you can say it's the best, but it'll be right up there with the Ohio States of the world. But the point being, I think this year, with everything that he has around him now, with the more talent that he has around him, with the A.D. Mitchell, maybe a Jonte Cook or Isaiah Nayer coming back healthy, and a Jordan Whittington, who we're not going to talk about right now, but is totally worthy of being on a top 10 list of Texas football players based on what he's done at the University of Texas. Worthy can get back to just being a guy, a pure route runner, a guy who gets open, and a guy that once he catches the ball, does his best work. Shifty, fast, quick, and can really catch it and take it to the house. Like, he's that type of guy. I don't think A.D. Mitchell is so much that type of guy. I think Xavier Worthy he's more in the Jonte Cook mold, I think, than he is the A.D. Mitchell, Isaiah Nayer mold, as sort of a smaller, more quick, shifty receiver. They're not exactly the same, but sort of in like the Devontae Smith type role. In that sort of mold where he's just kind of the do-it-all, get open, hit me in space, and let's take it, like, try to tackle me type guy. And that's what he's the best at. That's where he needs to be used. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. He's gonna be the number one target. There will be games where he's not, but overall, I think he's the best offensive weapon Texas has on this football team when you consider everything. His production so far at Texas. I mean, I even forgot to mention, out of all the true junior Power 5 wide receivers coming into this season, and this takes into account like all the drops that Xavier Worthy has had, an 11% drop percentage last year, and all the issues that he's had dealing with different quarterbacks in his time at Texas. Like, think about it. I mean, he's had to deal with Hudson Card to Casey Thompson to Quinn Ewers. I mean, that's a lot of quarterbacks in 3 years or in 2 short years playing the position of wide receiver at Texas. Out of all the true junior wide receivers coming into this season, he has more touchdowns and more receiving yards than any of them. And it's not particularly close. And that includes like Marvin Harrison Jr., who I fully expect to be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. Like, he's that good. But Xavier Worthy, from a sheer production standpoint, has more touchdowns and receiving yards than anybody who's a junior at the wide receiver position at the big-time college football level. So I'll leave it at that. That's all you really need to know about Xavier Worthy. He's just a really good football player. And if he has a big season, like many think he will have, I think he could be a first-round draft pick, which is exciting for Texas fans because I think next year you could see 2-3 first-round draft picks from the University of Texas. And that could start a trend, a good trend for the program moving forward. So it's been a while since Texas has had multiple first-round draft picks in the same year. And I think we're staring that down in 2024. So,
or even just one first round draft pick,
yeah.
mind you. I mean, I think my comparison for Xavier Worthy would probably be Deontay Johnson.
Yeah.
I think he's faster than Deontay Johnson, but I think from a shiftiness standpoint, from a body type standpoint, he's your typical X receiver. He's going to be running every route in the book. And I just think they got to give him the ball more, and they got to get him the ball with it in positions to run after catch, because that's where he's the most dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. It's the time you've all been waiting for, everyone. We've made it to the number one player on our list. And I think I'm suspecting that we have the same player. Who is your number one player?
My number one player was Kelvin Banks. I'm assuming you had the same.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll let you start off because I think you'll be able to do the analysis more justice.
So if we all think back to last year, there was a lot of worry about the Texas offensive line because they were going to start 2 or 3 true freshmen. And ever since Kyle Flood has arrived with Steve Sarkisian from Alabama as the co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach, and I'll talk about this in my recruiting videos, he's done a fantastic job of the past 2 cycles, the 2022 cycle and this past 2023 cycle, of getting big-time offensive linemen. And Kelvin Banks just thrust into the hardest position, arguably, on not only on the offensive line, but in football, period, at the left tackle spot, responsible for protecting Quinn Ewers' blindside. He was a revelation, in his freshman season. Started all 13 games and was really, 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 really good. Like, he was, period, one of the best offensive linemen, not only left tackles, but one of the best offensive linemen in college football, period, in his true freshman season. And he's already being projected now to be a top 5-ish draft pick in the 2025 draft because he has 2 more years at Texas. So he'll play this year and next year, the first year in the SEC, and then probably be a top 5 pick. And when is the last time that Texas had an offensive lineman drafted in the first round? So it's a good trend that we're seeing. But he was, like, period, one of the most impressive true freshman offensive tackles that not only in Longhorn history, but I think that we've seen in a long time. Second big team, God, I can't talk. Second all Big 12 honors last year. And he was the Football Writers Association of America freshman All-American. He was just an all-around, really smart, really productive football player. Only allowed 1 sack last year. Didn't get hurt. He's got the frame that you want in an offensive tackle, just big, hard to move, hard to get around. He's got good feet, heavy hands, good blocker, good pass protector. I mean, you think about the guys that he was put up against last year. Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, the Iowa State pass rusher who I
Will
think got
McDonald.
drafted, Will McDonald, the K-State guy who I think went 32nd overall to the Chiefs.
Uzama.
Yep. I mean, he
And
had the
6th overall pick to the Raiders.
yeah, that
Um,
God, I'm forgetting.
I'm,
Don't come
I'm
to me.
I'm running a blank.
But he
Um,
had to block some dogs last year, and he did a fantastic job of that. I think big things are in store for Kelvin Banks. I wouldn't be surprised if he's first team All-American this season.
yeah, I think going into this year, the only improvement I could really see him having is just from a standpoint of understanding, just from a run blocking standpoint, there's always levels to be sharper and to be better. Just push that, get up to the second level, get to that linebacker, push that defensive end a little bit hard, a little bit further off the ball, set that edge a little bit better. There's always the little things, but there's really not much he can improve on. Just overall, there's not a whole lot you can do better than what he did last year. The only guy that pops into my mind that's even somewhat comparable is Penei Sewell. And Sewell didn't even get to play his sophomore year. I think it was a combination of COVID and getting hurt as well. But man, I mean, it's been a long time since we've had a guy like this on Texas. It's
Yeah,
great to see.
and Tyree Wilson was the guy that we were thinking of,
Yeah.
the big edge rusher out of Texas Tech. I mean, he went up against some really good pass rushers, some first-round draft picks, a top 5 draft pick for that matter, and Will Anderson. So, yes, he's going to be tested. Again, Texas goes to Tuscaloosa this year. There are some other good pass rushers in the Big 12. And then next year in the SEC, it only gets better. But he is just purely one of the better offensive linemen already in college football after his true freshman season. And he was one of the reasons, like, he was the glue that held the Texas offensive line together last year, along with Christian Jones at right tackle. So, yeah, there's not, I could rain the praises of Kelvin Banks here for the next hour, but we're not going to do that. Any parting shots? What do you think of this exercise? What are your overall takeaways, if any?
Well, I think right now, my ability to give analysis is a little bit limited just because of the amount of Texas football I actually got to watch last year. With me being in Kansas and having, student athlete responsibilities and all that, there was a limited amount of games I was able to watch. But going into this year, though, I think at this time next year, I'm going to be a lot more comfortable. So um, for right now, I'm happy with our list. I think the fact that there's even 8, 9 guys being considered for a list like this is a great sign. And I think right now it all comes down to these guys living up to expectations, and then two, who's going to be the next guys to step up. There's always going to be injuries. There's always going to be next man up mentality on a football team, and that's where I would point to for this Texas football team when it comes to them being successful and reaching that 10-win mark.
Yeah, absolutely. From a roster standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, there's not many holes. And what the coaching staff is doing in recruiting, they might stack another top 5 recruiting class on top of the past 2 years. I mean, these are the type of things that these are the reasons why, as we say, recruiting is the lifeblood of college football, of a great college football program. Texas is not only recruiting at a SEC type level now before they actually enter the SEC, but they have been consistently year after year after year. They're winning the big battles outside of the state of Texas. They've gone to Florida multiple times to get like super blue chip caliber guys with C.J. Baxter last year, the 5-star freshman running back who's coming on campus. This year there are a couple other guys. Just today, DeAndre Robinson from the Orlando area, the 4-star defensive lineman. They won a battle over the University of Florida. And before, like 10 years ago, like it was rare that any program from the Big 12, much less, could go into Florida and steal a caliber guy the level of DeAndre Robinson from the University of Florida or the University of Miami. Like those guys usually were kept in state by those big college football programs in the state of Florida. But Sark is doing a great job recruiting Arizona, recruiting California, recruiting. He hasn't really put a flag down in Georgia much yet, which is like the next step. And it's super hard because, I mean,
we all know what Georgia is right now.
We all know what Georgia is right now. But everywhere else you can pretty much think of, I mean, all the states that you want to be recruiting in, Texas, California, Florida, are the three main, like, really fertile grounds for recruiting. Sark is doing it at a national level. He's getting the best of the best, the guys that are offered by Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Ohio State, Michigan. Like, if this continues, and I'll give you guys some numbers on Saturday or Sunday when I do my recruiting episode. Texas already has an equal amount of super blue chip talent on the roster right now as some equal or more than like a couple of the past national champions have had on their roster. Like, it is so surprising when you look at the overall talent on this roster, most of it being young, and I think that's a good thing. Like, most of the super blue chips on this roster right now are sort of unproven, and that's okay. Most of them came, in the 2023 recruiting class. But when you just look at the sheer talent on this roster right now, I mean, you can't find me 3 rosters in college football that you can definitively say are more talented on paper than Texas is. Like, it's just that simple. I think they have double, in fact, the amount of super blue chips that Oklahoma has right now. And that's why you saw the 49-0 last year. So it matters. And it'll continue to matter. And as long as the Texas football staff, coaching staff, is doing what it's doing, we're only going to see good things come to Austin the next couple of years, even moving into a tougher conference. So I'll leave it at that for today. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to our one listener. Did we get any comments? I just want to make sure.
No, we did not. No.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys for listening. I thought this was a great episode. As I mentioned, I'll be back this weekend for a recruiting breakdown. So we're about halfway-ish through the 2024 recruiting cycle. And hope to see you all soon. Go check out some of the episodes we've recorded lately on our main feed. And we'll see you on the next edition of the DITHOL podcast, I guess we're calling it now.
DITHOL. Yep.
So just like the chances of Texas not having the amount of super blue chips that they need, we are gone. Hook 'em.
Horns up. Peace out.